Taek twisted to put his glowing arm behind him just as all the conjured lights vanished. Imala held her breath when the chamber plunged into complete darkness. The whispers and hisses merged with the sound of the water pouring into the basin, dissolving all dimensions previously observed. The cool, moist air brushed at their faces, but rather than take a moment to consider whether or not this was a new feature due to the multitude of sudden movements, Imala dropped down to one knee and pressed her hands to the sides of her belt, finding her knives. Above her, Claire aimed her right hand up and to the side, and her left hand directly ahead. A small sphere of orange light bloomed in both palms, catching Imala's attention. She grinned when both spheres shrank down and disappeared. A distance away, a large orange sphere burst into existence. It grew just above the pile of rubble before the hole in the far wall. Using that spot on purpose, Claire observed the space around the sphere, now presented under its expanding light. Taek was no longer standing there. The upper section of the chamber sprang into view as the second orange sphere of light exploded into existence. The top of that wall on the right was silhouetted below the radiance, cutting from the front of the room to the back. A portion of the stone walkway attached to that wall was revealed. For a moment, while the two elementals were encased within their cocoons, Claire and Imala were given a majority of their previous awareness of the chamber. Noticing the one elemental taking Taek's place upon the pile of rubble, Imala was about to turn her head to look elsewhere for him, but then Claire was upon her, throwing the edges of her cloak forward. She knelt and enclosed both her and Imala within. Forced to crouch further down, Imala giggled and exclaimed, "Mommy!" "Oh, shut up," Claire groaned. Both cocoons imploded, squeezing the elementals into bright humanoid-shaped lights. The chamber flashed white, and the elementals erupted. Curved walls of fire raced in every direction, consuming the air with heat and burning every surface. The pool of water rocked about when both fronts met in the middle of the chamber. Bypassing one another, they growled their way to the extreme points of both upper and lower sections. There, they slammed against the stone with a shout, twisting and swirling in anger. Blowing themselves out, the orange light faded, once more plunging the chamber into darkness. The water sloshed against the edges of the basin. This was accompanied by the currents running from that previous hallway, regaining their former pace to fall over the edge into the pool. The trickle and gurgling having resumed, the chamber was left with only memories of its dimensions. The whispers were gone. Claire pulled her cloak back and leaned away from Imala, who lifted her head and straightened her back slightly. "That was scary," she whispered. "Psh," Claire scoffed. She then extended her right hand out to the side. Glowing wisps sprang to life and started to gather among her fingers and inside her palm. Meanwhile, Imala pulled two knives from her belt and held one in each hand. She couldn't see anything, but she tried to listen past the moving water and the new whispers Claire had called to herself. When the ghostly blade solidified itself in her hand, that same groggy voice spoke. "Just imagine." Imala was forced once more to roll her eyes about in search for the source. It should have been coming from that large hole in the back wall, but the way those words echoed about the entire chamber, she smirked at the idea of not being certain. "Having that power yourself," it continued, "instead of having to rely on something external." Behind Imala, Claire extended her left hand to the side and called forth a small sphere of pale light inside her palm. Instead of caging it within her fingers, she flung her hand upward, sending the brightened sphere of light into the air. It sailed toward the stone walkway above, but slowed to a stop before reaching it. There, the source of light floated in place. They had nowhere near as much light as all of those conjured sources gave before, but her attempt was to expose the immediate area around them. The only movements so far were from the water at their left. No scuffling of feet upon stone, no tinkling of dust, no ruffling of fabric pulled their focus in any direction. Yet that one groggy voice continued. The arcane arts of summoning are fascinating. The implications of such manipulation are seemingly limitless, but not at first glance. First comes the shock, then the ego boost, then it becomes a gimmick. Before long, the mind can't help but wonder just how far this power goes. Her left hand free, Claire called forth another ghostly blade. Ah, yes, the groggy voice said. The confidence, the trust. Every time you call for them, they arrive. Over time, some sort of relationship is formed. Maybe it's nothing more than a bond akin to one between master and servant. Claire wrapped her fingers around the newly formed blade. But, the voice asked, how substantial is it? How much does the line blur between the physical and the spiritual? In the end, when one has chosen to follow this path in life, will they learn that they were the servant instead of the master? The weaker one who relied so much on the stronger. Ha! Imala's bark split the air. She remained crouched in front of Claire as she spoke. Samson was saying the same thing. She paused, waiting to see what kind of response she'd get. The resulting silence made her grin. Aren't you supposed to say that's because he was right? Or did him leaving really bend you guys out of shape that much? After another moment of silence, a groggy voice asked, Did he tell you why? Imala's grin shrank some, not catching the full scope of the question. Why he went beyond, the voice finished. Imala's grin returned. To be free? Another pause. Isn't that why you do it? She asked. Instead of hiding here in this forgotten place, Samson, he was able to move without the limitations of the flesh. And he tried to free you as well, the voice said. I can see it on you, the residue. The ritual was left unfinished. Claire looked down at Imala as though she'd suddenly be able to see something she hadn't noticed before. Yet Imala remained crouched before her, head trained in the direction of the large hole that was barely visible. And what about you? The voice asked. Claire lifted her gaze. You, the voice continued, who are trained in the arcane arts of summoning. It's different for you. Yet, you are her second. Haven't you ever felt it? Drawn in at the beginning by your fascination of the act. No, the actual ability of being able to call something from the spirit realm. Didn't you wonder what it felt like? What reality might look like from the other side? Yes, it is different for you. What do you mean different? Claire asked. Different from what? There is a difference between you and her, the voice answered. She is of another school of the arcane. You well know the flavor of bringing about something that wasn't. You might even savor it every time. After all, even if you do not speak with your mouth, to call forth anything requires a speech. The mind dances in the intoxication of the experience. Maybe you just haven't been able to give that sensation the right definition, but it's there, isn't it? Now that you are here, you are aware. The definition is settling in your mind, is it not? Now that it's happened, you can't deny your growing curiosity. How is it different from me? Imala jumped in, rising up from her crouch. Her eyes still fixed ahead, she continued, How do you know I haven't tasted the same things? Grown curious myself. It was Samson who let me taste it. The voice chuckled, and it tasted divine. Every bit of it, Imala agreed. The voice chuckled again, but this time both Claire and Imala felt it in the air. Like a low hum vibrating along their skin, penetrating the surface to settle as a rumble in their chests. They gasped when this wave washed down into their stomachs, and further still. They nearly lost their grips upon their weapons when a tingling sensation swelled within their groins. Sharp streaks of numbness tickled their inner thighs and fell down to their knees, causing their legs to shudder against their will. Both blades fell from Imala's hands as she grabbed at the buckle on her belt. They clanged upon the stone at her feet just as she popped the buckle loose. Gripping one end, she stretched her right hand outward, pulling a portion of her belt free of the loops along the top of her pants. Extending her left hand, she pulled the rest of the belt free. It dangled in her grip until she let it drop on the floor. She was about to reach up and pop the buckle in the middle of her leather tunic when Claire snatched her wrist. "He's done," she whispered. Imala flinched, fluttering her eyes, and then she looked down at Claire's hand. She then looked to see Claire at her side. "You don't have to continue," Claire said, looking her dead in the eyes. Imala stared back, her expression dazed. Then she looked down. Her two knives were glinting from the floor under Claire's light high above. Her belt was nothing more than a solid black curl along the stone. The facts of what happened were slowly coming to her when she realized that the chamber walls no longer vibrated with the voice's low chuckle, though it suddenly spoke again. "Just giving you an idea of what to look forward to once you've gone beyond. Just imagine that sensation being a constant in your new existence." Before lifting her head, Imala grinned. "It was actually really fun," she whispered. Claire had to release her wrist when she stooped down and picked up one of her knives. Straightening, she started forward, leaving Claire behind. Claire knew the sensation that had gripped both her and Imala, yet it had been exaggerated. Not just that, but it was concentrated to certain parts of the body. Maybe Imala had experienced something like it when she and Samson were coupling before that hot spring, but it was no surprise it was still new to her, since she didn't practice the arcane arts of summoning. It was true, however, what that person said about the confidence that developed in one who practiced such arts. She was about to reach up and signal to her conjured light to move forward, but then Imala was silhouetted against the sudden warm glow ahead. The outline of the hole in that far wall hardened in her vision, but the source that gave this light was somewhere beyond. She could see a rocky wall forming the beginning of a tunnel that cut to the right. Imala wasn't questioning it, having already reached the pile of rubble and was climbing to the top. Claire hurried to catch up, choosing not to warn her ex-comrade of what might lie in wait just around that corner. It wasn't because of any lingering sensation from the voice's low chuckle, though she was starting to have doubts in the rules Taek touched on in the beginning. However, the voice was inviting them onward.